This podcast is a production of Widener Law Commonwealth in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Keeping up with the latest legal thinking can be challenging. Our educational programs help you stay tuned in to the legal profession. The following is a recording from a 2017 Alumni Weekend CLE entitled Harry Potter and the Lawyer's Curse. Now here's the speaker from this event, Randy Lee, Professor of Law at Widener Law Commonwealth.
Thank you, Dean Johnson, both for the gracious introduction, but also for allowing me to be on a panel with Professor Deem and Professor Casilio. I cannot imagine a better honor to be included with the two of them since Michael retired. A huge void created in the law school, so it's really good to see him back and pretend that he still likes me. I also want to thank Natasha and Sandy Grafe and Brian Fernbaugh for making it so easy for me to be here. Most importantly, of course, I want to thank all of you for coming, not only to celebrate Widener Homecoming, but for helping me to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the release of the last Harry Potter book, which, does anybody remember what that was? That's right, it was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It is also the 20th anniversary of the release of the first Harry Potter book, which was, anybody remember that one? That's right, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. You're obviously the accelerated group, because normally when I ask those questions at CLEs, I get absolutely no response, and then finally someone will say, we're actually not here to listen to you. We just want the credit. We know nothing about Harry Potter. But this is obviously a Harry Potter group, and it's so nice that you all are here. So many friendly faces, and this would be such a much lonelier celebration if none of you were here. I also want to thank the Dean, actually, for letting me do a CLE on Harry Potter and legal ethics. I've been allowed over the years to do a lot of very curious CLE programs. Dylan and Lawyers, Springsteen and Lawyers, Shakespeare and Lawyers, Dickens and Lawyers, Billy Joel and Lawyers. But there are those who insist that Harry Potter and Lawyers is the weirdest thing that I've ever done. In fact, I remember the first time I did a CLE program on Harry Potter and Lawyers, it was at a conference kind of a thing. And there was a speaker's room, and I'm in the speaker's room with these three other lawyers, and the first one says, I'm doing Rule 1.6 and inadvertent disclosures. And then the second one goes, I'm doing Rule 1.10 and vicarious conflicts. And this was my favorite when the third lawyer said, I'm doing Rule 1.15 and trust accounts created by lawyers functioning as non-lawyer fiduciaries. And then they looked at me, and they said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm doing Harry Potter and Lawyers. And there was this very long pause, and then all of three of them in perfect unison said, Harry Potter, yeah, that's good too. Right, a rousing endorsement. In fact, I remember when I first told Sandy Grafe. Sandy handles all of the sort of getting the courses registered kind of stuff for the law school. And I first told Sandy that I was going to be doing Harry Potter, and she was fine. She doesn't care. But she's got to sell the thing to the CLE board. So she asked me, what is the connection between Lawyers and Harry Potter, the wizarding boy of Hogwarts? And so I told her, I said, well, Harry Potter lives in a magical wizarding world, but he also lives in a world that struggles with rules and truth and with balancing judgment, justice, retribution, redemption, forgiveness. It's a world where doing the right thing comes at a price, and what you do necessarily affects the lives and thinking of others. And Sandy stopped me right there, and she said, so the connection is Harry's world, and Harry's world is very much a lawyer's world. And I said, well, actually, yes and no, because actually I think it's more than that, because Harry doesn't just live in his world, he grows up in it, and he grows up to be an Auror, which is kind of like being an FBI agent or a CIA agent. which if you've seen any of the Jason Bourne movies, any of you seen any of the Jason Bourne movies, right? So you know the similarities between CIA agents and lawyers, right? They are both incredibly good looking, right? They both drive their cars down public stairways, and they both incapacitate the world's most deadly assassins with ink pens. But more profoundly, I added, Harry Potter grows up to be someone who can seek and encounter truth, can judge wisely, can forgive in a way that redeems, can deal with power and notoriety, can understand the importance of character and his place in the community, and that really is like being a lawyer. So I don't know if any of you remember this, but have you ever noticed how law professors have the capacity to make the obvious completely inaccessible? Right? Well, by this time, Sandy's eyes are starting to glaze over. It's like revisiting the recent eclipse, right? I can just see the moon going across her eyes, right? And I can hear the desperation in her voice because I can have all the fun that I want, but she's got to still sell this to the CLE board, and she's starting to think that she's got nothing, right? So she blurts out, so the connection is more than Harry's world. It's what Harry grows up to be. And I wanted to tell her, because I wasn't done, no, it's more than that, but I could tell that she was freaking out, and she really just wanted enough of an answer to get the course approved, so I let it go at that. But really the connection isn't just where Harry ends up in the series, it's also where Harry begins in the series. Because Harry Potter begins as a child, and the books are about how someone who does begin as a child can actually grow up to be someone who acts like a lawyer. Right? J.K. Rowling, by the way, is not the first author to trace that journey from childhood to lawyerhood. The most notable person to have traced it is probably Harper Lee, who begins To Kill a Mockingbird with the observation. Anybody remember? To Kill a Mockingbird doesn't really begin with To Kill a Mockingbird. It begins with a quote from Charles Lamb. Anybody remember the quote? It's, lawyers I suppose were children once. Lawyers, I suppose, were children once. And we're tempted when we see that quote to see it as a cut on lawyers, right? Innocent, promising, hopeful children somehow get twisted into these characters society loves to associate with cynicism and self-interest. And as To Kill a Mockingbird opens on a child's idyllic summer in this small southern town, it's easy to embrace that temptation. But for those who understand To Kill a Mockingbird, they understand that that is not Harper Lee's meaning. Right? To understand her meaning, and this is that moment where I actually do call on people, right? Because anybody ever take a course on video, right, online, right? And every so often, you got to push the button so they know that you're not dead. Because that happens sometimes. People like do CLE and they just die, right? So this is kind of like that moment. If nobody pushes the button, nobody gets credit. So I'm going to ask you a very hard question. What are these? These are good, right? These are keys. Very good. You get credit. So, but one more question. So, what do they symbolize in our society? What do keys symbolize in our society? Access. What else? Ownership. Entrance. You give the keys to people you what? Trust, right? Authority, access, power, control, ownership, right? All of those things, keys. I remember there was the summer after my second year of law school. I was working at a summer associate in a firm in Pittsburgh. And I was working with this other female summer associate. And in the course of working with me for 2.5 months, she came to understand very clearly that I was a goof, right? I just was. I mean, let's be honest. You guys spent a long time with me as well, so it's no secret. I'm not letting you know anything, right? But she understands. 3 months, she understands this guy is a goof. And the summer ends, and she goes her way, I go mine. And so later on, fall that semester, she and her family are touring Boston, where I'm going to law school, and they want to see where I go to law school. Right? So she calls me up and she says, could you give us a tour of your law school? And I said, sure. Right? And the only problem was that they were coming in on a Sunday, and everything at my law school on Sundays was locked down. But, I mean, that really wasn't a problem because when I was my third year of law school, I was an RA, and as an RA, they gave me keys to the dormitories, right? And then I was working on one of the journals, and so they gave me keys to the journal offices. I was working in a clinic, and all the clinic offices were in the academic building, so they had to give me keys to the academic buildings. So I have all these keys I can get in. So I meet up with them, I'm giving a tour of the law school, and as we're doing the tour of the law school, we keep coming to locked doors. And every time we hit a locked door, I reach into my pocket, I pull out a set of keys, and I open the door. Right? And at the end of an hour, now this is a woman who had worked with me for 3 months. She knew I was a goof, right? She knew what I was, right? She had evidence, and yet in the course of that hour, she and her family came to believe I was somebody because I had keys, right? If they had entrusted me with all of these keys, I must be somebody. Right? And interesting, a friend of mine was one of the lawyers for the Poor People's March on Washington. Right? Poor People's March in Washington. All of these like disenfranchised people, these people who had been, passed over, excluded, did not feel part of the American fabric. And they're descending on Washington to make a statement, right? This is this Martin Luther King Poor People's March, I Have a Dream speech, right? They descend on Washington to make the point that they will be excluded, they will be voiceless no longer. And they bust them in, and they drove, and they walked, and they hitchhiked, and they bikes, any way you could get there. If you were disenfranchised, left out, you came in to make the statement. You were part of the American fabric. And while they're there, and they're all camped out on the lawn, waiting for for Martin Luther King to do the I Have a Dream speech, and they're camped out there, and while this is happening, the United States Supreme Court issues an opinion, a holding, that is hostile to the rights of Native Americans. And the Native Americans who were at the Poor People's March in Washington, was very, very devastating for them. Not just that they had lost the case, but it was devastating to them because of the timing of the opinion. Right? Because they were there to make the statement that they were going to be excluded no longer, they were going to be voiceless no longer, and here's this United States Supreme Court opinion that's saying, yes, you will be. You will be. You will continue to be voiceless. You will continue to be excluded. Right? Because that's our decision, and we've made it. And we don't really care where you happen to be camping right now. Right? And so the Native Americans are all out together, and they're lamenting this, and other groups of people who are there start kind of gathering around them to figure out what's going on. And as these other groups of people are watching this and hearing the Native Americans talk about this, they start to think, well, you know what? One of them says, this isn't just about you. The whole point of this march thing is solidarity, right? We're all supposed to be standing together. What you do to one, you do to all of us. This is the front to all of us. And guess what? We don't have to take this. We all don't have to take this. You know what we're going to do? We are going to march down to the United States Supreme Court building right now. We're going to march down there, and we're going to take over the United States Supreme Court building. All of us. Tens of thousands of us. Right? And my friend, who's a lawyer for the Poor People's March in Washington, he's watching this unfold. And he said, Randy, first thing that came to my mind was, how am I ever going to do all these bail hearings? Right? He's freaking out. So they're all pumped up now. And the Native Americans, they go back into their tents where they're standing. And they change into their Native American garb. And everybody's like this was an affront to you guys. You guys stand at the front of the line. So they get the Native Americans to the front of the line. And the Native Americans are getting ready. And everybody's lining up behind them. And so this ocean of people start pouring into the streets of Washington, D.C., of course, with no permit. Right? And they're going to head over and they're going to take over the Supreme Court building. And my friend runs ahead, and he gets up on the steps of the Supreme Court building because he's like, well, I might as well get there first, and maybe I'll think of something that I can do. So he's watching the United States Supreme Court building. He's watching this river, this flood of people pouring down the street toward the United States Supreme Court building. He's standing on the steps. He's watching this flood of people. He's freaking out, trying to figure out how he's going to manage this situation. And as he's staring at this flood of people, all of a sudden he hears a creak. And then he hears a slam. And then he hears a click. And he looks behind him, and the doors to the United States Supreme Court have been closed and locked. And there ain't nobody getting into that United States Supreme Court building except one person. Of all those people, only one person is going to get in. And who is it? It's the lawyer. It's the lawyer. Because when you get your license, they give you the keys to the kingdom. Right? As lawyers, we can say things nobody else can say. We can do things nobody else can do. We can go places nobody else can do simply because we're lawyers. Right? We are the holders of the keys to the kingdom. We are, as the preamble of the Rules of Professional Conduct tells us, officers of the court and public citizens with a special responsibility for the quality of justice. You talk about a profession of awesome power. In Book 3 of the Harry Potter books, The Prisoner of Azkaban, an innocent man is about to be put to death, and Harry and Hermione are pleading with Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard in the world, to save this innocent man, and Dumbledore responds to them, "I have no power to make other men see the truth. I have no power to make other men see the truth, but we do." Or at least the entire legal system is built on the assumption that we have that power. What Harper Lee is really asking in that quote is, how does one grow up to be a lawyer, to hold the keys to the kingdom, to be worthy of being that? The title of my talk is really a misnomer because it's not about a lawyer's curse. It's about a lawyer's cure. How does one become worthy of doing what we do, and what does it mean to do it well? Now, in the Harry Potter books, Harry is constantly encountering rules, some of which he obeys, some of which he obeys sometimes, some of which he disobeys openly, and some of which he disobeys discreetly. But undeniably, for 7 books, Harry has to learn how to live with rules, and obviously so do we. And like Harry, we struggle with that. About a decade ago, the ABA amended its mission statement. It deleted from its mission, quote, "promoting respect for the law," and replaced it with what may be the polar opposite of that, defending liberty. Now, I wasn't there. They forgot to invite me to that party. It hurt for a while. And I don't know why they felt compelled to make that change. But I do know this, that when a community of lawyers, and that's what the ABA is, a community of lawyers, when a community of lawyers makes that change, it means that they are struggling with how best to live within the rules that we make for ourselves. I had a former student of mine who went on to become a defense lawyer, basically a public defender in the military, right? And very good lawyer, very good person, great relationships with the military judges, with the military prosecutors. They had a lot of respect for her. They trusted her judgment, right? So we got the perfect lawyer, and then she comes across the perfect case, right? And this lawyer, this soldier in the military, he's a great guy. Everybody really likes him. Everybody envisions him having a great career in the military, but he screws up. Nobody wants this to have any long-term consequences on his military career. So she's got the perfect lawyer, perfect case. She's sitting down with the prosecutor. She's cutting the deal. And basically what she works out is the equivalent of a private reprimand. We'll just sit him down. We'll just talk to him, right? So no sooner does she get the ink on that deal than her perfect soldier screws up again, right? She's in the room cutting the deal. He screws up again. And she has to sit down with him now and talk about what just happened. And she suddenly realizes that her model soldier isn't making youthful mistakes. He is self-destructing. And she's got to get him out of the military and into the care he needs before he does irreparable harm to himself, right? So it becomes a race. And she goes to the prosecutor and she gets honorable discharge, and then he screws up again while she's cutting that deal. So now she's got to cut a new deal. And it's dishonorable discharge, and she's cutting that deal, and no sooner does she get that deal framed than he's screwed up again, and now it's dishonorable discharge and time served. And she's just rushing to get that set and get him out of the brig before he screws up again, and she's got the deal, she's got the ink on it, she's got his release papers, right? And as she's leaving her office to get him out of the brig and into the help he needs, she gets the call that he has committed suicide in his cell. Okay? And shortly thereafter, she gets a call from the kid's dad, right? And he's trying to come to grips what has happened to his son, right? And he's got the son's last phone bill, and he noticed that the last call the son made was to the lawyer just before the son killed himself. And the father wants to know if the lawyer can tell the father what the lawyer and his son talked about just before the son died, right? And we all know the answer to that question. Rule 1.9. I'm sorry, sir, but my duty of confidentiality to my client prevents me from discussing this with you. And I remember this former student calling me because she just wanted to talk about how she had realized that it was just all wrong. Right? Not Rule 1.9. She understood the requirement of confidentiality, why it is the way it is. But the resolution, how sometimes even good rules and good people aren't enough. I had another student, he went on to become a general counsel for a kind of a convenience store chain sort of thing. And the company got swept up on one of these anti-tobacco kind of moments, so they decided they were going to adopt a zero-tolerance policy for anyone selling tobacco to a minor. Okay? And, of course, the first person to get swept up in this zero-tolerance policy is a single mom, good worker, years of loyal service with terminal cancer. Right? Her only means of supporting herself and her child are this job, and at the time this meant that she was not only going to lose her job, she was going to lose her health care benefits in the midst of a battle with cancer that she could not win. Right? And what's my student supposed to do with that one? Right? He wrote the policy. Right? What does zero tolerance mean if the first person subject to zero tolerance keeps her job? Right? And it's not a bad policy, right? Selling cigarettes to a minor without checking the ID is a bad thing, and everyone was on notice. But she still was a good and loyal employee, and she still had a family, and she still had cancer, and it all still felt wrong. So because he was a good and savvy lawyer, he sat down, and I don't understand what he did or how he did it, but in the end the woman lost her job but kept her health insurance, and somehow there was an income stream that continued to come, right? And in the end, the situation ended up as well as it could have under the circumstances, and actually maybe a little better for the family than it would have if the woman had kept her job. Right? And I remember the first time I told that story, after the program, this labor lawyer runs up to me and he says to me, Randy, I can tell you exactly what your student did. Right? And he starts saying how my student had done this and he did that and he did something else. And my eyes, this time it's my eyes that are glazing over because I have absolutely no idea what this guy is talking about. Right? But I didn't have to. Because what he really just wanted me to know is that sometimes a good lawyer is enough. In addition to Harry having to live with rules, in the Harry Potter books we also find Harry having to make judgments about people. Right? Harry finds himself judging and rejudging the Snapes and Malfoy, Neville and Luna, Dumbledore, and even Ron and Hermione and Harry's own father. And in Harry's struggles to judge, we can see that we too judge less than wisely sometimes. Sometimes we judge with limited information. Sometimes we can too easily be guided by our own prejudices. As Albus Dumbledore says to Snape, you see, Severus, what you expect to see. My former student, who's a military defense lawyer, has this unique gift. She can look into her client's eyes and she can tell exactly what they are charged with. In fact, she and her secretary play this game where, as my student comes in the morning, she looks into the eyes of the people who are in the waiting room, right? And then she and her secretary sit down and they go through the files for the day, and my student guesses who's charged with what. And my student is always right. And the secretary is like, that is so incredible. It's amazing. How do you do that? And she just says, I can just see it in their eyes. Right? So one morning she comes in, she's crossing the waiting room, she sees this one guy, and she says, Randy, I looked into his eyes, and all I could see was bad. Right? All I could see. So I sit down with my secretary, and we're going through all these people, and then we come to him, and she's like, I'm stumped on that one. Have no idea. I looked in his eyes. All I saw was bad. And the secretary looks at her and says, you got that one right. This one's charged with everything, right? And he was, right? It is the rap sheet that never ends, right? And so she's sitting down with this guy, meeting with him, and they're going through the rap sheet, and he's like, yep, did that, yep, did that, yep, did that. And finally, they get to this rape charge, and he stops her, and he is adamant. That I did not do. We have to fight that because I did not do it. And my student is like, yeah, right. You want to help me out here? You got a terrible rap sheet. The facts of the crime are awful. Even for a rape, they're awful, right? The prosecutor has 4 witnesses, and he has your signed confession, right? How are we supposed to fight this? I don't know, but I didn't do it, and you have to fight it. So my former student is like, right, whatever, right? Because he's still her client, and he still wants to put up a defense, so what she's going to do but try and put something together. So she starts out, and she goes to talk with the victim's mother, and as I said, she's a very solid person. She just inspires trust in the people she talks to. So she's sitting down with the mother, and all of a sudden the mother opens up and she says, anything that my daughter says, anything she tells you, you really have to take it with a grain of salt because she has a history of blacking out, and the next day she's just not going to have any idea of what happened to her. So all of this you really have to take with a grain of salt, which is somewhat encouraging, except for the fact that we still have 4 eyewitnesses and a signed confession. But my student goes and she starts talking to each of the witnesses, and it turns out that 3 of the 4 witnesses tell her they really didn't see anything. But everyone was telling them that, this was what happened, and so they just repeated back to people what the people already seemed to know and what they obviously wanted to hear. But that still left 1 witness and a signed confession, and the 4th witness was insisting that he really did see something. Problem was that witness had his own set of charges almost as long as the client's, and the guy was desperately trying to come up with anything he could to get the prosecutors to cut a deal with him. But we're still sitting on a signed confession, right? Well, it turns out that the confession the client signed was a confession that was dictated to him by the military police, and he only signed it because he was told he would not be allowed to leave until he did sign it. Right? He couldn't leave the interrogation room. The interrogation is going to continue until you sign this. And so finally he agrees to sign it. And during this quote-unquote interrogation, he had repeatedly asked for and been denied an attorney. Right? So now there's nothing. And she sits down with the prosecutor, and it turns out her client really didn't do it. And ultimately the prosecutor just decides to throw out all the charges. Right? And in the end, the client comes to her and thanks her and says that he doesn't want to ever have to go through anything like that again. It's time to grow up and clean up his act. He has been a jerk long enough. He will make sure that he will never need my friend's services again. And he never did. Right? And of course, when she looked at him, all she could see was bad. As lawyers, not only do we need to judge people, but sometimes we have to judge situations and even life. Right? I had a friend, rising star in his law firm when he was an associate. He was the hot ticket for the firm's future success. Right? I think they even changed the rules for partnership so this guy could make partner early. Right? He was the real deal. But once he makes partner, the managing force in the firm, they call him in and they start to explain to him the realities of practice. And they say, we think you're going to have a great career in the firm and all sorts. But you know what? Now that you're a partner, it is time for you to get out and about in the community. It is time for you to start networking with the movers and shakers in town. We got to get you generating some business. We got to get you on some boards so you get to know all these people. You got to get on some boards. So figure out how to get on some boards in town with the other movers and shakers, right? Well, at the same time that the firm is trying to get him to get on these board things, his wife is volunteering for what was then known as the ARC, Association for Retarded Citizens, right? And the ARC was looking for a lawyer to be on their board. And the wife is like, I know a lawyer, right? And so the lawyer's looking at this, my friend, and he's like, well, this is kind of like double billing legitimately, right? I can make the firm happy. I can make my wife happy. This could work out okay, right? Now, there was one problem. If you agreed to be on the board, you had to have a buddy. Right, a buddy was like a friend, sort of the little brother, big sister kind of concept, but not because it was adults. But that idea, you had to have a buddy, right? And the guy's like, I'm really busy. I don't have time for a buddy. But then he thought, I'm a lawyer. I know how to control people. I know how to get people to do what I need them to do. I can keep the buddy in the box. Right? I'll give the buddy as much time as I have, but buddy's not getting any more than this. I can make this work, right? Okay, so he agrees to be on the board. He agrees to take on the buddy. Well, now there's two problems. The first problem is the buddy refuses to stay in the box. And the second problem is the buddy keeps forgetting his bus pass in the morning. Right? Buddy takes the bus to work. Right, buddy forgets the bus pass. He has to go back and get the bus pass. By the time he gets the bus pass, the bus is gone. Right, so what happens as soon as he realizes he's forgotten his bus pass, he calls his buddy because they're buddies. Right, so the lawyer is in the middle of this meeting with all these really important people because that's what lawyers do. Right, and he's got the screen alerted that when the buddy calls, you don't put the call through. Doesn't happen, right? They know that. But when you don't put the call through, what does the buddy do? Just calls back again, immediately. Right? So they have to put the calls through because he's driving them nuts. Right? And the lawyer, his response is, I can't leave now. Right? I am in a meeting with all these really important people. And he realizes after a while that he has to leave. Because if he says no, the buddy just calls back. He will not take no for an answer. So he's like, no, you don't understand. I can't leave now. And the buddy's like, but you have to leave, right? If I don't get to work, I'll be late. I'll lose my job. And the guy's like, no, you don't understand. The people I'm in the meeting with right now, what they make in an hour, your whole life you won't make. I can't leave them. I can't close this. No, you don't understand. Go get your bus pass. No, I can't get my bus pass. If I get my bus pass, I'll be late. So, and finally the guy just realizes this is never going to end, right? This happens repeatedly. So he just gets, when the call comes in, he just starts looking at whoever he's meeting with and saying, I'm sorry, I have to leave, right? And you can imagine when he walks out of that firm, what he's like, right? Man, this world is garbage and nobody understands, and I got things to do. I got to make things happen. There's so much pressure and so many expectations on my life, and nobody gets it, and nobody understands, and nobody's helping me, and I got to get my buddy, right? All this stuff is just blowing out of him as he's leaving the firm, right? And then he gets to the bus stop, and he says, my buddy won't let me stay grumpy. I leave the office, I'm in a crummy mood, and I pick up my buddy, and we just start laughing. And I appreciate things I never appreciate. I notice things I never notice. And I get back to the firm after I drop my buddy off, and everybody in the firm looks at me and says, why are you such a jerk when you leave and so nice when you come back? Right? And he says, it's because my world just changes when I'm with my buddy. And maybe this judging stuff can be as elusive for us as it was for Harry. Right? Like judging and rules, justice is a big deal for lawyers, whatever that word actually means. And in the last two Harry Potter books, J.K. Rowling presents her readers with two mechanisms for justice. Right? First, in the Deathly Hallows, Ron encounters one of these mechanisms by a pond when he returns to Harry and Hermione after abandoning them during their quest to defeat the Dark Lord Voldemort. And what's going on here is Ron and Harry and Hermione had been out battling the Dark Lord, but Ron, he becomes discouraged, he becomes frustrated, he becomes jealous during these battles, so he just abandons Harry and Hermione. But then later he returns to them to see if he can make things right. And so here Ron is at this pond, and the justice to be administered by this pond is meant to lead to not only forgiveness of the abandonment, but even to the restoration of the relationships. Right? But to accomplish this justice here requires Ron to perform an act of contrition, to come to the water with a spirit of penance and a desire to conquer the temptations and personal demons that led him to abandon Harry and Hermione in the first place. This mechanism of justice transforms Ron, transforms his life, and it restores all that was broken. Now, in contrast, in the Half-Blood Prince, Albus Dumbledore encounters a different mechanism of justice, this one on an island, isolated within a cave. And this mechanism of justice is the Dark Lord's justice. And the justice to be administered here is designed to yield the satisfaction of revenge. Right? The Dark Lord requires those who seek justice here on this island to drink a potion that confronts them with the greatest regret of their life and makes them thirst for forgiveness. Yet this justice provides them no way to quench that thirst for it. That thirst. For if they touch the water that surrounds the island, they will die. Right? Thus, there you are on this island, tormented by thirst, surrounded by water, but if you drink the water, you die, and if you touch the water trying to leave, you die. Thus, the Dark Lord's justice offers torment and revenge, but no way to quench your thirst and no way home. And readers of the Half-Blood Prince are left to ponder which mechanism is better and which mechanism is most like our own. In his essay, The Choice of Tycho Brahe, Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo tells the story of Tycho Brahe, who spends his life charting and mapping stars from the island of Uraniborg. And one day, Tycho's benefactor, the king, starts to wonder if he's getting his money's worth from Tycho's work. So he sends his auditors off to Uraniborg. So they sit down with Tycho, and Tycho starts showing the auditors his maps and his charts and even his stars. But the auditors just don't seem to be getting it. They get the what, right? They know what he's doing. They just don't get the why. And finally, exasperated, one of the auditors interrupts Tycho and demands, to what end is all of this to be the means? Justice Cardozo, in his essay, ends up posing the same question to a group of Jewish religion students. To what end are your lives to be the means? But he might have asked the same question of us. To what end are our lives to be the means? There are in this room, right, and I know because I graded your exams, there are in this room a number of intelligent, talented people. Right? I'm not being patronizing here. I'm not being flattering. I'm just being honest. Right? That's how you get to be a lawyer. You got to be smart and you got to be talented. Right? And these bright, talented people, they work in offices and meeting rooms and courthouses, many of which are very nice. And they work with other bright and talented people. To what end are all of these lives and all of these resources to be the means? A friend of mine is a former chief DA for a county, former judge, right? And he tells a story about one Christmas. He was trying to get home one Christmas Eve, had been out doing errands, and there's this big snowstorm, and so the roads are slippery, and that's slowing everything down, and then Christmas traffic, and he gets caught in traffic, and that slows everything down. So he doesn't want his family worrying about him. This is in the days before cell phones, right? So, he sees a shopping mall, and back in those days, shopping malls had, like a bank of payphones. So he pulls in the shopping mall. He's going to use their bank of payphones to call his family and tell them he's going to be late. So he goes in, he finds a bank of payphones, he goes in, he drops his quarter in the payphone, right? And so he's talking to his family, and I caught traffic, and the weather's terrible, and the roads are tough, but, I'll be home soon, just didn't want you to worry. And he's making his phone conversation, he notices that there's this woman standing kind of off away in the shadows, and she's watching him. And when you're former district attorney, and somebody you don't recognize is watching you, you become attentive. Right, so as he's talking on the phone, he's watching this woman, and his mind, he starts planning out, if something unfolds after I hang up the phone, how am I going to get myself out? How do I handle the situation? Right, so anyway, he hangs up the phone, and no sooner than he hang up the phone, than this woman approaches him. Right, and this woman looks at him, and she says, "You were the DA in my case. You said things about me I didn't like, I didn't want to hear. And because of you, I had to do things I didn't want to do." This conversation is not starting out well. Okay? But then she says, "But you also saved my life, and I just wanted to thank you." And then she left. Right? Victor Borge, pianist, comedian kind of guy, He was doing a performance once, and he was wearing a microphone, and the microphone was on a wire, and end of performance, everybody claps, and they cheer, and they get all excited. And so Victor Borge starts out and gets to do a bow, and as he's doing his bow, people start throwing flowers onto the stage, and as people throw flowers, Victor Borge starts picking up the flowers. And there's this one flower that's off to the side, and Victor Borge, he's on the wire, he can't reach it, and he starts tugging on the wire, trying to get as close as he can, and he can't get to the flower, though, because of the wire. So finally, he points to a guy in the audience. He asks the guy in the audience to get the flower. Right? And so the guy in the audience gets up, and he gets the flower, and he hands it to Victor Borge, and Victor Borge looks at the flower, and he says, "No flower should ever be wasted." I think back to my DA friend story. And what's the point of that story? That no flower was ever wasted. Or at least one less was, right? Harry meeting Ron by the water teaches us another lesson for lawyers, the need to be personally involved without taking things personally. Certainly, Harry is personally involved when his best friend abandons him. But when you have a job to do, you can't take things like that personally. My friend whose client committed suicide came to my class to talk about being a lawyer. And 4 years after the fact, she still cried when she talked about his death. But his death doesn't change how she does her job. Right? She admits she forgets sometimes her clients are human beings. I don't know if you've ever had that problem with your clients, but she forgets sometimes her clients are human beings. She admits she yells at them. She threatens to kick them out of her office. "Get out of here. I don't have time to listen to you lie to me. Get out." Right? But ultimately she acknowledges, they all know I care about them. Rules, judging, justice, getting the job done. Finally, Harry Potter and lawyers also share a need for and a responsibility for community. Luna Lovegood can be incredibly profound in a way that can seem incredibly clueless. And there's this moment in the series when Harry is trying to isolate himself. He can't trust anyone. He doesn't want to put anyone else at risk. Every rationale seems to lead him to the conclusion that he has to go it alone. And it is Luna who finally says to Harry, "If I were you-know-who, I'd want you to feel cut off from everyone else, because then you're not so much of a threat." A lawyer came up to me once after a program and he said, "After 25 years of practice, you can forget what it means to be a lawyer." 15-20% of the time you have to sit with a client who's been wronged by the system, not by the other side, but by the system. And that takes its toll. And I think where you go to be reminded of what it means to be a lawyer is to the support of those whom we respect, who've come before us. For Harry, it's Dumbledore, it's Sirius, it's Lupin, it's Tonks, it's the Weasleys, it's his parents. I think for us, it can be another lawyer. Bruce Green is a friend of mine. He teaches at Fordham Law School. Bruce is a big deal in professional responsibility circles, right? He was on the Columbia Law Review. He was destined to clerk for Thurgood Marshall on the United States Supreme Court. And Bruce tells the story about how when he was in law school, right, he's a third-year law student, right, and he's doing volunteer work out at the Legal Services Clinic, and he's late for a meeting with his supervisor at the clinic. He's riding his bicycle, trying to cut corners to get there faster, and he gets pulled over by a policeman who gives him a ticket for how he's riding his bicycle, right? And here he is, he's just trying to do something nice, and he gets a ticket, from this police officer, and Bruce is he's now back on his bike, and he's going to be even later because he got this ticket, and he's going to have to pay money, he's a law student, doesn't have any money, and it's just like life is so unfair. And he's just running through this, and I'm just trying to do something nice, and I don't have any money, and now I get a ticket, and nobody understands, nobody cares, I'm just doing something. And I'm really important, and I got lots of things to do, and I have to study real hard because I'm a law student, right? But after a while, his mind shifts out of victim gear, and it shifts into lawyer gear, right? And he's like, wait a minute. I'm not going to have to pay this ticket, right? I know that if I contest this ticket, the cop is going to have to leave his beat, and he's going to have to come in and testify. And these guys don't like to testify under any circumstances. They're not going to want to testify over something trivial like a bicycle ticket. He's not showing up, and if he doesn't show up, they're going to dismiss the ticket, and I'm not going to have to pay. I can make this work, right? So he gets to the clinic, and he sits down with the supervisor. He's like, I am so sorry I'm late. This cop pulls me over when I'm trying to get out here, and he gives me a ticket, but you don't have to worry because I've figured out how I can beat this ticket, right? And the supervisor just lets him go and lets him go and lets him explain it. And finally, he looks at him and says, Bruce, would you really call a police officer off his beat so you could beat a ticket you deserve? And Bruce is like, it just sounded so different coming from someone I respected so much, right? And it's not enough that we allow ourselves to be inspired by others. Sometimes we have to be inspiration. In the Harry Potter books, people fight on even when the whole wizarding world is almost in total darkness because they know Harry's still out there and they want to stand with him. And sometimes we need to be someone others can stand with as well. I got in touch with a lawyer friend of mine once. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, and it was one of those friends you could pick up with right where you left off. And at some point we got to talking about friendship, and I asked her what a friend was, because it's kind of a novel concept for me and I needed help. What is a friend? And she responded, a friend is someone who lets you think and speak irrationally, but encourages, inspires you to behave better than you think. And it struck me that could define a lawyer as well, right? A lot of people think St. Thomas More is the patron saint of lawyers. He's not. Good guy, patron saint of public officials, but he's not the patron saint of lawyers. Patron saint of lawyers is this guy named St. Ives, who was basically a medieval, legal services tax lawyer, right? And so when they canonize St. Ives, they got to explain why they're canonizing a lawyer, and the way they explain it is that St. Ives was a marvelous thing to the people because with his help, the people of the land became twice as good as they had been before. A friend of mine's daughter came home from high school one day, and she announced that she wanted to be a Latin teacher. So her dad asked her, well, why do you want to be a Latin teacher? And his daughter answered, because I want to be for someone else what my Latin teacher was for me. And one of my law students actually told me a similar thing once. Said, I want to be a lawyer because I want to do for someone else what my lawyer did for me. And he explained that when he was in the process of getting a divorce, he had a 3-year-old, he had a 5-year-old, and it was a very, very contentious divorce. And he and his wife were fighting about all of the important things that people fight about. Forks, spoons, bowls, got to fight about it. You're not going to get it. I'd rather my lawyer get it than you get it. The whole thing, And they were setting up for a meeting. They're going to have a meeting this day, and the topic was they're going to fight about, I think it was like napkins. Right, we're going to fight about napkins. And this guy is gearing up for just a rollicking brawl over the napkins. And his lawyer's just kind of staring at him. Finally, his lawyer looks at him and says, divorce is really hard on a 3-year-old, on a 5-year-old. But it's even harder on a 23 or a 25-year-old, right? And 20 years from now, your 3-year-old, your 5-year-old is going to say one of two things. They're either going to say, when my parents split up, it was really hard, and they made it harder because they fought over everything. Or they're going to say, when my parents split up, it was really hard, but they made it easier because they worked really hard to get along. And guess what? You get to decide today what they say in 20 years. And my student was like, it was an epiphany, right? My life changed, right? Son of a lawyer friend of mine was getting married once, and he called home to tell his dad. And then he said to his dad after he said he's getting married, and I want you to be my best man. And, of course, that is not how it works, right? So the dad's tried to explain to the son, that your best man is a peer, it's a friend, it's not some old guy, and it is definitely not your father, right? But the son was adamant, and they go back and forth and back and forth. And finally the son just interrupted the dad, and he said, Dad, you're a lawyer. And my whole life you've been telling me that words matter. And the words are best man. And you are the best man I know. I know some of you by now are thinking, Randy, you are in the midst of one long law professor moment. I do not have the keys to the kingdom. I'm not saving the world. I'm not a hero. I'm not even a wizard. Nobody's going to write 7 books about me. I go home at night and my kids ask me, Mom or Dad, what did you do today? And I just say, not much. Not much. I just stood with a kid who had no one else to stand with him. Not much. I just helped someone fulfill a dream to start a business. Not much. I just helped someone buy a home or made their apartment safer. Not much. I just got answers for someone who on their own couldn't have gotten past the automated answering system. Not much. I just helped a homeless man get to keep his dog. Not much. I just solved the most important problem in someone else's life when they knew they couldn't do it on their own. Friend of mine, this one actually has a name, Steve Angrisano. Steve Angrisano's dad runs a toy store, which is a really cool job 51 weeks out of the year, right? But the 1 week out of the year that it is not a cool job is, help me out, this is like make sure you're still alive. Yes, the week before Christmas is not a good year, or not a good week for running a toy store, right? The week before Christmas is crazy. So the family tradition was that the week before Christmas, all the siblings in their families would take off work. If you've moved out of town, you come back into town, right? And everybody helps out that week at the toy store. And then on Christmas Eve, they would close the toy store at 3 o'clock or whatever time, and they'd all go back to the parents' house, and there would be this big Italian Christmas Eve dinner waiting for them, and they would all have Christmas Eve dinner together. Right? At least that's how it was supposed to work in theory. Right? In practice, how it works is they would close the store, come back to the house, and no sooner would they get back to the house and they'd move to the dinner table when the phone would ring. And it would be someone who had just gotten paid and they had put toys on layaway, and they would want to know if they could still get their toys so their kids would have their toys on Christmas morning, right? So the dad would grab his coat and he'd run down to the toy store and he'd get them their toys, right? And then he'd come back, and no sooner would he be back than the phone would, help me out, ring again, right? And every Christmas this would happen 3 or 4 times, and every time the dad would go out. And finally, one year, they're ready for dinner, and the phone rings, and one of the brothers just meets the dad on the way to the door, and he says, "Pop, you're not going. It's been a long week. It's been a long day. You've done enough, and we're eating dinner." And the dad looked at his son, and he said, "Son, I'm not going for him. I'm going for me. You see, if I don't go now, then tomorrow the man who just called will be a man who made a mistake. But that will pass, right? He's been that man before, and he will be that man again. And frankly, I've been that man before, and I will be that man again too. And you know what? I can live with being that man, and so can he. But son, if I don't go now, then tomorrow I will be a man who could have helped a friend in need and chose not to. And your father has never been that man, and I just can't start being him now. And on some have compassion, solve a problem, make a difference. At the end of the last Harry Potter book, after Harry has saved the world, all he gets is a sandwich and a nap, right? And for most of the world, that seems anticlimactic. But for a lot of lawyers, that seems about right. But maybe it's enough just to know that the world you saved is a world worth saving, or in the end, one less flower was wasted. You know, at the beginning of this, I thanked you all for coming, and clearly I do appreciate that you all came, because I was not kidding when I said this is an incredibly lonely experience when I have to do it by myself. But even more than that, right, the more important thing is that even though you have left, you may not realize this, even though you have left, I continue to do this, right? I continue to have students. And I could not continue to have students if I did not continue to have alumni that could become their heroes. And so I want to thank all of you for using your magic to make the world a better place, and for making sure that no flower ever gets wasted. Keep up the good work. Keep crossing paths with me. Have a good day.
Widener University Commonwealth Law School is the Pennsylvania capital's only law school, with 3 specialized centers of legal scholarship through its Law and Government Institute, Environmental Law and Sustainability Center, and Business Advising Program. Widener Law Commonwealth offers an exceptional learning experience that is personal, practical, and professional. Visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu for more information.